There's 3-level go-kart track. It's really pretty amazing. And throwing axes too, which we did not let the 12-year-olds do. They wanted to. They saw the sign. They were like, oh, we're going to throw axes. And I'm like, no, we're not. Anyway, so that's has very little to do with our wonderful guest today.
That was
Except
seamless.
she has kids. And so this all awaits her. Welcome, Katie Labounko. So glad that you're here.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
For folks who don't know Katie, one of the fascinating things that we'll dig into in a little bit is I remember when you came, I was here 8 months pre-COVID. And so it was not that many Sundays really when it all comes down to it that we were there in person. But I remember you coming and I remember getting to know your story and that you had been at the church years and years and years before, and we're just now coming back. And I find that so fascinating, and I'm excited to dig into it. And you just joined the worship committee, which is also really exciting. So glad you're here. But let's start there. Let's start with, as we've done with lots of folks, sort of your journey into the church and then back. So one of the things that we recently had asked folks in our listening circles, which the Committee on Ministry hosts every year, was sort of what you were looking for when you first came to the church and what you were looking for now. And so for you, how is it, because you were a youth, right? So how was it that you found the church then, and then what brought about your return?
So my whole family joined the church when I was 7, I think, and my sister was 1, and my parents were redacted. But so my whole family joined the church at that point, and it didn't really stick for any of them. I think my parents sort of intermittently went for a couple of years and then kind of stopped. But I continued going, not super, super regularly. But all through high school, I came to the youth group. And, it wasn't until I sort of went to college that I kind of drifted away the first time round. And then I sort of came back a couple of years ago when my son Leo was about 11 months old. He's now 3.5. And yeah, I think having kids made me sort of remember this great community. And I was lucky enough to still be within driving distance. And I wanted my kids to experience some of that. So when I was a kid, when I think back on my sort of spiritual and religious life of childhood and adolescence, I think in some ways I remember really kind of wanting to be religious and like feeling that there was a lot of comfort in faith. And I think that I both sort of craved the comfort of, feeling that there was an afterlife and, that there's a God that loves you and everything. And I think I also had some sort of, I think I read about Pascal's wager in high school, and I was like, yeah, that Pascal guy has a really good point. I better not risk this. For anyone who's unfamiliar, Pascal's wager is sort of the idea. Pascal was a mathematician who was also a Christian, and he said that any rational person should choose to be Christian, because if you're an atheist and you're right, then congratulations, you're dead at the end.
Right.
And if you're wrong, then you get like an eternity of suffering. Whereas if you're a Christian and you're wrong, like congratulations, you're dead. And if you're right, then you get an eternity of paradise. So no matter what the odds are, even if it's like 1,000,000 to 1 that the atheist is right and the Christian is wrong, it's still logically better to be a Christian. This is, of course, assuming a world where like fire and brimstone Christianity and atheism are your only 2 options,
Right.
Which I don't think I quite cottoned on to at that point in my life.
I love that. I've always felt too, I have a Mormon branch to my family, and part of the Mormon process, my aunt was a door doorstep conversion. Mormons were walking around going door to door, and she was in a time of life where she was really ready for something. And anyway, it's been a wonderful part of her life, and she's done mission trips all over the world, and all of her kids and everybody really just dove all the way in. But part of your becoming Mormon is you write down everybody's name who you love and care for in this book, and then we end up going, so says the theology, we end up going to heaven forever with all the other Mormons and people that the Mormons love. My grandfather, who was a deep Methodist, really committed church person, he told his daughter in no uncertain terms that she was not to write his name or his mother's name, who was also deep Methodist into the same church, which is kind of fascinating that those are the only two people that he was really wanted to make sure weren't there, which is a story for another time. But I've always thought the same thing, like, who knows? Fundamentally, really anything could be true, right? Like there's some theologies that really resonate for me and ring true. And, who knows? Like maybe after I die, I wake up and there's a whole bunch of Mormons and they, it's like, pass me a harp. But like, if that's the situation, like, okay, here we are. I have a hunch that that's probably not the case, but I'm right there with you and Pascal, or with teenage you. So that's right. Part of why you were there then.
Yeah. So I think one of sort of the challenges of like late teenagerhood for me was sort of coming to, I actually really tried. I remember when I was 17, I made a New Year's resolution that I was going to pray every night, like no matter what, I was going to pray every night. And I did that for a year.
Wow. Every night for a year.
Yes. And then I went to Sweden when I was 18, and I ended up joining a quite evangelical church and attending it twice a week for church and Bible study. And I was pretty upfront about, having doubts and everything, but everyone I was interacting with was really, quite religious. And I read a lot of particularly Christian apologism at that point, which is sort of Christian authors, C.S. Lewis being the most famous among them, who sort of try to make, similar to Pascal, try to make a bunch of sort of logical arguments for Christianity. And just none of it ever quite resonated with me, no matter how much I wanted it to. So I think that my coming of age in my late teens and early 20s was my sort of just coming to the conclusion that I personally am an atheist, and I think I've kind of come to terms with that. I, at this point in my life, would say with a fairly high degree of certainty that not certainty, but that I personally do not believe in any greater power. So it was kind of interesting coming back to the church with, I think less in a quest for divinity and more in a quest for community and a moral framework and personal meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had the most fascinating conversation. I just did this memorial service. Gosh, I guess it was yesterday. And I was talking to the husband of a childhood friend of mine, and he was like, and this was apropos of nothing. I mean, he knows me. He knows I'm a minister. They used to be Christmas and Easter people at my last congregation because it was close enough. But he said, he's like, people, I'm just not religious. And I was like, that's all right. Like, I wasn't true. I didn't bring it up at all. Like, he's like, but I'm not even spiritual. And because often people say, well, I'm spiritual, but not religious. Like, they're just like, ugh. But this was the first time he just said, I'm really neither. And his wife, my old friend from childhood, she's like, so you're not like curious at all? Like, you don't wonder about life or anything? And he's like, no, I'm good. I got a lot going on, which I thought was fascinating. And then we were talking about it though. And I was like, well, I think so that theological questioning is certainly one piece of it. I was like, but like you were saying, Katie, I think I was like, and I think a lot of people are looking for community, and a lot of people looking at this world right now. And granted, this should come with a caveat that I be a little preacherly, but this world, this moment, right, that we're sharing is so bananas that to be able to take it all in and then find ways to have a meaningful effect and help, serve and change the world. That's another piece of what we do. And it was like, yeah, no, I'm good.
That's funny.
That's what my husband is like. It's really funny because he's come to church like once or twice with me. I think out of solidarity, but he just is like supportive, but not super interested. And he has asked me many times, he's like, do you want me to go with you? And I'm like, no, it's fine. If you want a Sunday morning without the kids, like, have at it.
That's the other. So you then, in addition to Leo, you had your second son during the pandemic, right?
That's right. Actually, I found out I was pregnant like a week or two into the pandemic. Really? So it was, my pregnancy was like very wrapped up in the pandemic. It was actually in some ways worked out really well because I was feeling pretty sick and exhausted, but I was able to work from home. And I think that the fact that it was my second pregnancy meant that I was a lot less anxious about it than I would have otherwise been. So I kind of knew what was sort of normal for me and what wasn't. And we were really lucky that we were incredibly low risk. Beatty and I were both working from home, and my mother-in-law was looking after Leo. So it was like kind of the four of us in a bubble, and that was it.
And we should say, and what's your second son's name? Who's so adorable?
Oh, Felix.
Baby Felix.
Yes.
Oh.
Baby Felix.
We do still call him Baby Felix, even though he's like just a guy now.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he's, he's like 1.5, but he's like walking around with his hands in his pockets, like smoking a cigarette, and we're like, Baby Felix.
One day you'll be showing his partners photos of him when he was a baby, and you'll be playing him this podcast of like being called Baby Felix.
This is a totally unsolicited piece of advice for any parents or prospective parents out there. But one of the things that I'm really happy I did with both Leo and Felix was before they're born, I set them up an email address, and I email them every so often. I'll send them like just pictures of what's going on and like, pictures of themselves, and tell them like whatever new cute stuff they're doing. And it occurred to me, I can send them both a link to this podcast. I will send Baby Felix a link to this podcast.
So, Katie, can I ask you a question? I'm interested something that might resonate with people or people might want to know more about is when you say that one of the things that's drawn you back to First Church is personal meaning. Can you say what that is for you? Like, what is personal meaning?
I think it's something that sort of bothered me throughout my 20s. So I went to MIT, and I was like surrounded by like people who are super, MIT is sort of an interesting place. This is my experience. Perhaps not everyone's mileage is the same there, but like, I loved it, by the way. I had a great time, but intelligence, particularly like scientific or mathematical intelligence, is just absolutely the best trait a person can have. And everything else is like way, 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 way less important. The amount that, interpersonal or verbal intelligence was devalued there was, now that I've sort of been in the real world for a while, was pretty messed up and strange. And, then I became a software engineer, also in a, really, technically focused community. And I think I began to feel, especially when Leo was born, I felt that the groups I was in, both, academically and professionally, what was valued above all else was not necessarily what's that important at the end of the day. Like, I don't know, if my kids were chess prodigies, that'd be pretty nifty. And that would like get them a lot of social cachet at MIT. But I'd rather they just not be jerks, and I'd rather they be happy and, have fulfilling relationships. And I think that, this isn't true necessarily among my, intimate friends and family, but I felt that sort of the the broader social circles I was in, those things weren't really valued. And in school, there's, all this teaching for academic excellence and everything. And I think that there are, I wanted to have a source of meaning and searching for truth that is not just around academics and particularly like technical areas for my kids to grow up in, and outside of my family as well, especially because my husband and I are both kind of like that, maybe more than I would like us to be. So I thought that I don't know, I wanted to have a community whose whole purpose is sort of to lead me and my kids to be better people, instead of like smarter people or more successful people.
Yeah.
That wasn't particularly eloquent, but
no, that makes perfect sense.
It really is.
Yeah.
Somebody was at church a couple of weeks ago. Our Joe Murphy, who's the executive director of UU Mass Action, was preaching, and she quoted somebody who basically said that in a world of distraction, that to feel is a revolutionary act. And I think, to me, that's just kept sticking with me and resonating over and over in my mind. And it's like, this world is so bent on, both pushing us and then pushing us to achieve more and more and do more and more and valuing things. But to be able to actually kind of slow down, to be able to be reflective within it, to be able to seek meaning, like you're saying, is both takes support and takes a group of people who are also sort of thinking similarly and striving similarly. But it's amazing. I think of the pressures on families right now. I think of the pressures on just everybody. And so much that we just take for granted, so much that like with technology, even. I mean, the fact that, we're doing more and more all the time, that we're more accessible, that we're just always doing so many things all at once, and then being able to really kind of actually pay attention is sometimes, a challenge. Is sometimes
absolutely. Yeah, I sometimes feel like the whole academic to professional track, at least the one that I went on, sort of felt like, or feels like, a treadmill at times. And like, right. It's easy to get really focused on that and be like, I should make my treadmill go faster and faster, and look around and be like, yeah, my treadmill's going pretty fast. But then maybe you don't need to be on the treadmill, or at least not all the time. Like, maybe how fast your treadmill is going isn't.
So a word that's important to me, this is really resonating with me. A word that's important to me is the word sanctuary, which of course names a certain physical space in our building, but and a sacred space. But it also, for me, it names an idea of what UU is about. And I think what sacred spaces in many religions are partly about, which is creating something which is a retreat from the world in a certain sense, and a restoration to the world in another sense. There's so much in our society is, as you've been saying, kind of molding us into career, into competitiveness, into things that we're supposed to be in order to justify our existence to ourselves. But those things are not really intrinsically valuable, right? They just become this kind of career hamster wheel, or self-worth hamster wheel, or success hamster wheel. And then we sort of come back to our sacred space and our sacred community. And it's a return to reality. It's a return to what our lives are really about. And that's a sanctuary from all of the noise and the pressure and the rhetoric and the stress and all of that. But it's not escapism, right? It's also a return to what we really are, what our community really is, what really matters. And that's an idea that's an idea that really matters to me. And that's in part what brought me to UU, having grown up in in an atheist household, in a household that for me, church was just going to go joining my school choir and singing in church spaces, which was absolutely lovely. But what I sort of missed out on was having a sanctuary, I think, and this idea of sanctuary has become important to me. That's my own way of putting it. So a lot of people have their own ways of putting that idea, I think.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love that, the idea of a sanctuary. Yeah.
I think that's partly what I've seen too over and over again as people come back into the physical space of the sanctuary. As people come back into the building and people see one another and come back and participate in live and in-person worship, there's just this whole other, you think about it, that's like on the very most basic level, that's an hour that people aren't looking at their phones.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Mostly.
which is really different than a lot of the rest of our lives. Or I think of like Sandy Island when we have, which I know that you guys have come to, and that kind of connection and that kind of place and that kind of, that kind of quality of community and just being in that sort of time outside of time, it just makes such a big difference.
Slightly off topic, but Leo actually joined me for the entire service yesterday.
Oh, I saw. Yeah.
He, for some reason, he didn't want to go play. He was like, "Nope, I want to stay in the service. I want to hang out with you." And I was expecting that we'd end up leaving, 5 minutes in to bring him down to the nursery, but he was pretty good. He was a little wiggly, but I don't know. There was something like really nice about having him there. I don't think he got that much of it, but he liked the singing and I don't know. It was really nice in this space of sanctuary, surrounded by this community.
Good
to have Leo there for that.
I always like to say when kids are wiggly in church that sound is the sound of the church not dying.
Yeah, right. I know.
There are plenty of places where it's real quiet. And you can really dial in because there's like very few people there. And I think that's one of the things I've loved about the outdoor services too, is having, kids rambling around and
yeah, I love that too.
It's always been one of my other people's kids in worship is my favorite. I get a little grumpy with my own, but like I love other people's children.
I mean, this is a bigger topic, so we don't have time to go into in a big way. But like, I love the idea of what's it called, feral children at church. Is that the phrase? I came across that phrase in a wonderful UU World article I read a few years ago, and it's like how we want to create a church space. Like an environment in which the kids will just like be running around. It'll be their space,
Oh yeah.
And during the pandemic, of course, that wasn't really happening. And it's like I like one of my goals is to build it back again at First Church.
Oh yeah.
Is to have a space where there's like kids running around and it's their space and they're at home.
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean? And
Well, and we're already seeing it. Just the other. I came into the church and the upper cast of the middle school for the musical was on break. And I came into the doors near my office and then I'd heard just this like, and it was just this like this mass of feral children just tearing from the upper gathering hall through the back of the sanctuary. Nobody was there, so it was fine. And then all the way down around through the parlor and down the like secret back staircase. And this is like a bunch of kids who have grown up there and know the space and know it all. You have this really beautiful, especially Katie, with when you start kids at the early age that your guys are, like they'll know every little back corner, they'll know every little staircase, the bell tower, all the details. I still remember so many details of the church I grew up in, where I was from age 0 to 18. You just get to know a space. And so I think as we're coming back and we have things like the Families Together program, where we, usually about 4 or 5 times a year, gather the kids, gather the parents, and the kids get to play and sort of know the space. But yeah, it's a very sweet thing. So let's see. So we had also, if you had any questions for us, or we sent you all those other things. So did you, want to touch on any of
Let's start with
the
let's start with the UU principles and sources. So Katie, is there anything that particularly, do you have a favorite principle or source, or is there anything that particularly resonates for you?
Yeah. So uh, I think that my favorite principle was the fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. I think
Mm.
nice.
that's sort of been the core of my connection to the church. I also think that it's an interesting principle because it's really the only principle, as far as I can tell, that is in tension with itself for in a way, because of
Mm.
course responsibility does limit freedom, and of course any unharnessed freedom
Right.
doesn't is including freedom to harm others is not good. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, it was all in this one principle
Yeah.
that you have to be free and responsible. And I think that figuring out sort of where that line is between freedom and responsibility is sort of up to each of us, along with figuring out what our personal truth and meaning is.
Yeah. I love that too. And that I love both that it's ongoing. So I think of, the you that came early on, hungry, looking for that prayer practice, there's a very different free and responsible truth search for truth and meaning than you now, than you in 10 years. And for me, the same thing, it's like this moment of my search is very different. And it's not like a linear thing. It's not like a really clean progress of enlightenment. It's just like all sorts of curly cues and backsliding and beautiful moments of inspiration. And then, it's a fascinating thing. And the responsible piece to me is also, it's almost like responsive, and because it's this feedback loop too, like both limiting freedom and being clear and accountable, but then also being able to grow and change. It is a fascinating one.
It's that phrase has an interesting history too, because when the principles were first drafted, when the Unitarian and Universalist denominations merged in 1961. The original phrasing of that was free and disciplined search for truth.
Which I
And
bet you would like.
yeah, and then the wording when it was redrafted in, I think it was the early 1980s. They were rewritten, and the word disciplined disappeared and was replaced by responsible, and the word meaning, I think, was added. So it became the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And I think about that a lot because, well, what does this word disciplined imply back in 1961? Because to my ear, right, that sounded a bit sort of authoritarian and like creedal, shall we say, right? Like there are official teachings and you've got to be
Mm,
disciplined and swallow them. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
but what was interesting was that other people in our group heard something different that I hadn't heard, and
yeah.
particularly people with Buddhist practice or with had
Mm.
other spiritual practices in which discipline is an important idea. They actually resonated with that, and I thought that was very interesting. But
Yeah,
the
that's
replace.
my experience with the word. I have like
Oh,
a
right,
very
yeah.
sweet, it means I'm taking this seriously. I'm going to think about this every day before I come to get my kids. I'm going to take to the cushion and I'm going to have this spiritual practice,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
ongoing
yeah.
discipline, which I have a very positive relationship.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think I'm closer to Sam in that. Yeah, I think it brings to mind more like rote learning and wrapping children's knuckles with rulers and things. Than
Mm-hmm. But then maybe also with responsibility, maybe one way of thinking about it, right, is that free and responsible are like balanced with each other. Maybe they're in a sort of a zero sum game or something like that, where you can have more freedom and less responsibility, or more responsibility and less freedom. But maybe there's another way of thinking about it, which is that responsibility is something like accountability. This is a bit, I think, like what Chris was saying about being responsive, right? Is that in my freedom, in my spiritual search, that freedom is in fact enabled and not limited by it being collaborative, right? If my freedom is my spiritual search in community with others who are helping me along and holding my hand as I make more and more discoveries. A responsibility is like being part of a community, being woven into a community, right? And community sort of enables us and empowers us, and it's in some ways a condition of our freedom. So I think this idea of free and responsible search for truth and meaning is actually quite nuanced and quite multi-layered.
Yeah.
So I think about that a lot.
It reminds me a little bit also of this sort of ongoing debate. I don't know, the hot button issue of free speech versus responsible speech.
Yeah.
Because, right. I mean, as you were saying, Sam, there's, you don't want to limit freedom, but you don't want you want to be accountable.
Yeah.
And you don't want to infringe on other people's freedoms or well-being by exercising your own.
Yeah. And also just sorry to natter on about this. The last thing is another resonance of responsibility for me is responsibility to myself, because a free search for truth and meaning, if it's authentic, that is to say, if it's really free, it isn't just a whim, right? It's not just me coasting on my whims. It's actually trying to be true to myself and responsible to what it is that I'm meant to find, And I think, and maybe that's another resonance of the word for responsibility.
And then, did you have any questions for us?
I would love to hear a little bit more about both of your personal journeys. First of all, to start off with, Sam, I know that you are working in a PhD and are a teaching fellow, but I don't actually know what your PhD is in or what you're teaching. I'm worried I'm like getting back on the treadmill and I'm like, academics, let's talk about this.
Oh no, it's so good because it's so specific. Yeah, go. I love talking about Sam's PhD.
Well, for me, it isn't a treadmill. It's like one of the things in my life that does give my life meaning. And I can hear my fellow graduate students kind of rolling their eyes or being horrified by this because the academic job market, at least in the humanities, is so horrible. Is that we're sort of having these days we have to steel ourselves against it, and we have to take a very professional, emotionally just detached view of it to look after ourselves. But quite honestly, I just one day I'd love to teach again, and I'd love to get paid to do it. But I think that's my vocation. I absolutely love being in the UU community and doing the work that I do for First Church, and I want that to be a big part of my life forever too. But I think teaching is what I most love doing, and it's what I feel called to do. And my PhD is a bit of a weird kind of historical study of this great Irish author Samuel Beckett.
Oh, I know Samuel Beckett.
Oh yeah.
I did a lot of theater in college. Funnily enough.
Who did you play?
Oh, I didn't actually. So I was mostly in the MIT Shakespeare ensemble. And if you can imagine like this, that, the union of MIT students and Shakespeare nerds, you get like a real weird group of people.
I love it.
But I did once do lighting direction for Waiting for Godot.
Cool.
Cool.
I did not much care for Beckett when I went to college. I figure the further you deviate from Shakespeare, the further you've strayed from,
Well, I love Shakespeare, and my favorite class was teaching Shakespeare, and I can't wait to do that again one day, either as a TF or as whatever, So I love Shakespeare.
You should do a class at the church, man. You should do an annual Shakespeare deep dive. Anyway,
maybe Katie and I can do that together. Maybe we can do it together. Yeah. Anyway, so I just the last thing to say about it is that I made I'm telling everybody this because it kind of was a bit of an ego boost because I feel I took a long time out of my program, and I took a lot of years sort of not making any progress on my PhD. It was just sort of in the background of my life, and being a typical sort of academically minded person, I felt terribly guilty about it for a long time, and I got over that. But I realized the other day when I did a word count that I've written 1.2 million words. I know,
oh
right?
My gosh.
that's
Your
more,
PhD is 1.2 million
yeah,
words long.
yeah.
I'm
I've
doing
written
like
what
the Wile E. Coyote, like eyeballs bleeding out of my head.
I know, and I did a double take when I looked at it. I was like, whoops, because the word limit for a PhD is 100,000 words, and I've got 1.2 million. So
You have
that's
12
like,
Wow.
PhDs.
I know. so so it was nice in a way, because it's like, oh, you know what? I've been beating myself up for years thinking I'm just a really slow writer and that I can't, and I can't write, and it's just, and writing is hard. Any obviously, and you guys write as well. I mean, the writing is the hardest thing in the world to do, right? But actually, I can write. I just haven't got
It's
anything out there
amazing.
published with my
Apparently,
name on it.
editing is the hardest thing in the world
Yes,
to do.
editing
That
is
is
the hardest thing in
bananas.
the world. So I've got to
I
edit.
actually don't think I have written 1.2 million words in my life. I think if you tallied up all the emails and like
Yeah.
everything, I
Yeah,
don't think it would hit 1.2 million.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Congratulations. Can you tell
Thank
me
you.
more about your PhD? I'm now like super intrigued about Beckett and what you have
Yeah.
to say
Well,
about him.
the elevator pitch version is that I'm telling a pretty cool story, which isn't known, because I sort of found it out in the archives, about Samuel Beckett, who was a World War II hero in the French Resistance, which is known. It's known that he was a spy for the resistance, spying on the Nazis in France during World War II. But I found that he was also a humanitarian aid worker in internment camps in authoritarian Vichy France under German occupation, and he helped a lot of people. And he never talked about this. He never told anyone. In the way that many people who rescued, Jews and refugees and people fleeing the Gestapo, they often didn't tell their stories after the war, because they were often very painful stories to tell, but it influenced his writing in a very profound way. And so I'm looking at how his experience of trying to help people who were imprisoned and deported under Nazi occupation, how that went on to influence his writing.
Super
That is
fascinating.
fascinating. Wow.
That's why it's 1 million words long.
Yeah, it's 1 million words.
1 million and then 2 more maximum PhDs.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if only I could get some grant funding out of those 1.2 million words. So, yep. Thank you, Katie.
Great.
That's anyway. Yeah, that's my other life. I got my lovely first church life, and I got my lovely 1.2 million word dissertation writing life. So
That is so cool. I would love to, whenever I next see you, maybe next Sandy Island, I'll corner you and make you tell
sure.
me more about it. That
Yeah.
sounds amazing.
Oh, was there a question for Chris too? I feel like Chris has been left out.
Yeah, tell me about your PhD, Chris.
Yeah,
No.
well, actually, no, it's fascinating because both my parents, so I was actually raised by two professors. So my
wow.
dad was a biology professor who did apparently groundbreaking research in cell division way back in the day. So he was 52 when I was born in 1976. So this was a while ago. And he was teaching at BU. Then he eventually went on to be a minister, be ordained at 62 as a Unitarian Universalist minister, and then served some churches, retired from being teaching in the university. And then my mother had a PhD. It was a communications professor at Bridgewater State College, and she did her PhD in Greece on nonverbal communication. So she went to a place where she didn't speak the language to research nonverbal communication, which
In
I think is
Greece?
kind of
Wow.
fascinating. And she had long, bright red hair at the time. And this is many years ago. And there wasn't a lot of redheaded Greek people. And people had all sorts of intense reactions to her red hair. But anyway, so she also had a PhD. So when I was little, I sort of assumed everybody had PhDs. So I would like joke. It was like a running joke in my childhood that I would, it wasn't a question of when, it wasn't a question of if, just a question of when, that I would get a PhD. But, I'm good. I really love what I do. I love being a minister, and there's all sorts of different ways that I can help and serve. And some ministers do go get more degrees. But I don't know, my wife is really hungry to go back and get back into school and get more degrees. I'm good.
So I have a confession. One thing I love to do sometimes when I'm at church is when Chris's door is open and he's not in his office, I like to sneak into his office and look at his bookshelves. And he's got all these really cool like biographies of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he's got a lot of really cool books in there, which are fun to browse when he's not there.
That's really
Feel
cool.
free to borrow stuff. Yeah, we have a lot of books between two ministers who used to have a lot more office space, and we used to have a lot more bookshelves. We have I'm still bringing more in. So yeah, my office is always open for people to come in and borrow books.
Katie, do you have a favorite author?
Oh, I mean, Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which Shakespeare play do you like the best?
Okay, so if I'm allowed to pick, if it's one Shakespeare play, it's Macbeth. I think it's just like a perfectly told little ghost story. It's got great characters. It's got great lines. It's like spooky. It's fun. It's great. Yeah. If I'm allowed to pick a series of plays, I would say that my favorite is the Minor Tetralogy, which is Henry VI parts 1 through 3 and Richard III.
Okay.
Which is
not many people pick that. That's good.
So part of the problem is that Henry VI part 1 is just not very good. And I think that sort of turns people off. Like no one's going to start with Henry VI parts 2 and 3, even though those are fantastic. But I think they're so great. There's so many great historical characters. There's amazing villains. Even some of the like goodies are like really actually pretty nasty pieces of work. There's Queen Margaret, who is an incredible character. She is the only character in Shakespeare who shows up in 4 different plays. She shows up in every single play of the Minor Tetralogy. Henry VI part 1 ends with Joan of Arc burning on stage, and Henry VI part 2 begins with her like still. They like comment about how she's like still smoldering in the background. It's just, I mean, I don't know. It's just like there's action, there's war, there's romance, there's heroes and heroines and villains and villainesses, and it's just a great if you ever have quite a lot of time to drop on for Shakespeare plays, with the caveat that the first one is actually pretty bad. I highly recommend those ones.
Cool.
Fantastic answer.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I should return to those. It's a long time since I read the Henry VI plays. Those don't get taught a lot. So when I was teaching Shakespeare way back in the day, I didn't teach those ones. It's a long time since I read them.
This was super fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on. And I'm so excited that you're in the midst of joining the worship committee. So excited to create more stuff with you. And just recently.
Yay.
So this is going to be great. But I'm so glad that you and your boy came back, and your whole family. And it was really, really great to talk. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Katie.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.